All right, so good evening, everybody. Hope your week went well. I hope that some of you found some time to do a little bit of the homework or just consider it, maybe go over John 1, 1 through 5 and fun. Cameron and I did in our home group. We read through most of the chapter of John, and then Cameron jumped on John 2 and did a really good job. I was very pleased. So, start off with a word of prayer, and then we'll get right into it. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this marvelous day, and thank you for these wonderful saints here who have taken the time out of their day, out of their personal lives to bear me for an hour and some change. I pray you give them wisdom that they seek to understand this material and give me wisdom to teach it, because we are so grateful that we have the capacity to learn new languages, and especially one so important that you saw fit to have your scriptures written in. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. So, introduction, before I get into what I've written on the board for today. So this is lesson 3, as everybody knows. I hope so, at least. We're going through a few different of those question words: who, what, where, when, why, and how, as a kind of our guide through what we're doing. So today's question is, how? Such a topic near and dear to my heart. We get actually 2 relevant how questions. One is, how can knowing Greek affect our reading of the text of Scripture? And how does someone approach the text when they know Greek? I love this topic, and I actually brought a few different books kind of in this realm of discussion. Oh, okay. When I was first studying the Bible, I was taught, much the same as all of you, I'm sure, to utilize more than one translation for our study, one English translation. This, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. It's actually a great thing, for as the teacher of the last class that finished not too long ago had mentioned, it gives us a greater nuance to what the underlying original languages actually say, or mean, rather. Well, what if you could actually read the original language? Would you still need or even use other translations? Of course, you would use them, but they're not necessary. In fact, knowing Greek, as a geek, knowing Greek gives us a deeper appreciation for various English translations. So briefly, what I want to do in this introduction is I want to explain why I use primarily 3 particular translations apart from the Greek in my personal study. And I use the English Standard Version, the New American Standard Bible, and the Net Bible, or the New English Translation. So, just as a definition I have there on your handout, the ESV is what we call formal equivalency, or word for word. What they're trying to do is get your English translation as close to what the Greek means without changing it. Well, what the English Standard Version does is makes it a little more eloquent in style, to where it makes a lot more sense reading it. And I use the ESV because it is the translation of primary usage in my local church. It's also very loyal to the underlying Greek text, hence the formal equivalency. It flows nicely, and it uses a particular textual platform, like Joe and I were discussing just a minute ago. It's the textual critical apparatus. If you would like me to explain that later, I can give you way more information on the textual platform. I am a geek. So, the NASB is another one of those that's a formal equivalency, or it's a word for word. I have there written very wooden, in quotation marks. I use the NASB because I grew up with it and was told by my youth pastor, who was the man who discipled me in my early walk with the Lord, that it is word for word, and it is the best. As one of the students here is missing today, his wife and I like to joke that it is the inspired version. We both like it. But much of that's true, that it is word for word, and a lot of people think it's the best. A lot of that is true. Some have said it's a bit too word for word. By consequence, the NASB is often, it sounds very wooden in its translation style. One of the reasons it does that is the NASB authors try to follow the original word order, so much so they also try to select as much as warranted a single word to translate a Greek word. They do it so often and so much that they also follow Greek syntax. So if you ever read an NASB, it kind of sounds a little odd. They add an extra word. Saying this, he said. The King James Version says it as well. You don't need either of those. But they're in the Greek text, so they write it down. It's, if you held them side by side, you'd really see this in glowing fashion. And with the third translation I use, you can actually see this. It has its faults, but just the same as every other translation of the Bible has their faults, the NASB translators should actually be, in my judgment, commended for their vision and methodology in doing so. So they want to be as faithful as they can, and it's one thing I appreciate about it. I also use the Net Bible, the New English Translation. I use it because of the platform it uses. What, Cameron? Smiling over there?
Oh, I love the other tab on your screenshot.
Yeah. It's an internet Bible, hence the photo there on your handout is actually of two different tabs. One is, which is kind of in the background. I was trying to fiddle with it in a way you could read it, and I failed miserably. So don't worry about that. I'll give you the website link, and you can check it out. One is the Greek text, or the English text of the Net Bible, and behind that little window is actually the first note of John 1:1, which is corresponding to the beginning, and it's a good 3 paragraphs long. Mostly talking about how the author is probably thinking about Genesis 1:1. So it's also in a paperback edition as well, a reader's edition. My Greek tutor actually memorizes scripture out of the Net Bible because it flows really well. On there in your handout it says it's a mixture of dynamic and formal. A lot of places it'll sound just like the ESV. It'll sound like the Holman Christian Standard or the Christian Standard Bible or the NIV with its own flair, and it also sounds like the New Living Translation on occasions. And one can use it for free with the Greek highlighted on the opposite side of the screen. Sadly, I did not get these printouts in color because it's expensive. And if it was in color on the foregrounded one, you have on the left side the English text and the right side the Greek text. And if you'd highlight a Greek word or an English word, it would highlight each usage throughout the paragraph. And so you can kind of compare them. Down there at the bottom, it gives you the morphology of the word, its Strong's number, its transliterated, its root, so forth and so on. So it's a really good study tool, which is one of the reasons I use it, and is part of its platform. It has great, excellent translator's notes. Often they will tell you why they translated something some way, which is amazing for a Bible. They have great study notes, which was sadly behind that little screen, and a lot of historical notes as well regarding text, critical issues, and what other people have commented on the passage and so forth. It takes the best the ESV, the NASB, NIV, NLT, and even the Holman Christian Standard Bible has to offer, and it kind of rolls it all into one. And they are amazing men. If anyone's ever heard of the name Daniel Wallace out of Dallas Seminary, he is a big guy behind him. So, by no means are any of these my favorites, nor would I shy someone away from using another one, except the message. No matter what English translation you end up using, after learning just a little Greek, it will expand the questions you're going to have to much different quality when studying the text. So we can see the question of how can knowing Greek affect our reading of the text of Scripture, even in the New Testament itself. So as your second note there on the handout talks about how the New Testament authors utilized the Old Testament scriptures. How did they read the Bible? Very seldom do they quote verbatim the Masoretic text, the Greek Septuagint, or even the Targums. And I have a little explanation of what those are. MT is a Masoretic text. It's the Hebrew language text. It's actually, the Masoretes are a group of Jews who faithfully copied the text circa 900 AD. And when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1948, question mark, they were shown to actually be very faithful. So much so that a lot of people use it as an apologetic. I'm not in the business of doing that here, but they're faithful. The other one is a Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Hebrew text, the underlying Hebrew text, and that was translated from about the 3rd, 4th century BC to about the 1st century BC. It took a really long time to translate. There's a lot of fun myths about it. That's why it's called the Septuagint. It stands for 70. But it is what is most likely the most popular version of the scriptures in 1st century Palestine. And the other one is what's called the Targums, which is the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew text, which did exist in the 1st century as well. And it's from the, again, the 3rd to 1st century BC. It's really old. It's Aramaic. But they hardly ever quote them verbatim. I was trying to find a percentage of what they quote the most, and I couldn't find anything. They will sometimes, a lot of people have argued that they are utilizing the Old Testament text for their unscrupulous means, changing lots of stuff to suit their own purposes and to get their own desired result. But it's arguably disingenuous, but a little bit factual. The author may use a text that is different in some manner so as to, he may utilize the text differently in some manner as to what we may have in our English translation, but it doesn't mean it's done with any malice. Really famous one from the book of, from the Gospel according to Matthew is, "And out of Egypt I've called my son." If you go to your English, if you go to its equivalent in Hosea, the very next passage talks about that he punished Israel and so forth and so on. This is why he's called them out. Well, he didn't punish Jesus by sending him to Egypt, so what does this mean? A lot of authors will take that. So there's a conceptual reason the author is quoting it. The original authors of both the Old Testament and the New Testament, so the Old Testament translation of the Greek, the Septuagint, and then the New Testament authors, they knew Greek, and they utilized it with great skill. God ordained it this way, and in his wisdom in doing so shines forth in a resource such as my first big book of examples. G.K. Beale and D.A. Carson are the editors of this volume called The Commentary on the New Testament Use of the Old Testament. You're more than welcome to borrow it. I don't imagine you'll get through it in a week, but it's one of my reference tools. It's a really great study method, something to study through. It's quite fascinating. It's heavy. So if anyone would like to read it or peruse it or borrow it till next week, more than welcome. I'll leave it right here. So that brings us to our last point in this introduction before the lesson. It's the abuse of scholarly hubris. So on page 2 there, we've got a very long quote. I've mentioned this before, and it's a very important topic for me, and why I do believe wholeheartedly that the common churchman, or churchwoman in this case, should know even just a little bit of Koine Greek. And I'll give an example from a gentleman I referred to in the first class, and his name is Bart Ehrman. Cameron and I listened to a debate with Bart Ehrman on Friday. It's fascinating. So I'm just going to read this through. You can go and follow along there. Bart Ehrman says, in the Gospel of John chapter 3, Jesus has a famous conversation with Nicodemus in which says, "You must be born again," quote unquote. The Greek word translated again actually has 2 meanings. It can mean not a second time, but also from above. Whenever it is used elsewhere in John, it means from above. He gives 2 citations. That is what Jesus appears to mean in John 3 when he speaks with Nicodemus. A person must be born from above in order to have eternal life in heaven above. Nicodemus misunderstands, though, and thinks Jesus intends the other meaning of the word, that he has to be born a second time. How can I crawl back into my mother's womb, he asks, out of some frustration. Jesus corrects him. He is not talking about a second physical birth, but a heavenly birth from above. This conversation with Nicodemus is predicated on the circumstance that a certain Greek word has two meanings, a double entente. Absent the double entente, the conversation still makes little sense. The problem is this. Jesus and this Jewish leader in Jerusalem would not have been speaking Greek, but Aramaic. But the Aramaic word for from above does not also mean second time. I had that in bold. This is a double entente that works only in Greek. So it looks as though this conversation could not have happened, at least not as it is described in the Gospel of John. That's from Bart Ehrman's book, Jesus Interrupted, page 155. Now I have to ask, how would you respond to that?
Couldn't it have meant in Aramaic one of the other, from above or a second time? So in other words, if in Aramaic they're having a conversation and Jesus said born from above in Aramaic, and Nicodemus could have misunderstood it like that, and then just when John goes to write it, he's explaining it in Greek and uses that. You know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. Bart Ehrman's argument is that in Aramaic it's not a double entente, it only means one thing.
But why does there have to be a double entente in the Greek?
The word itself, the Greek word it can mean from above. It's the word anothen, or anothen. It's actually an adverb. Well,
But what if John wasn't using it like that? He was just using it as from above? Or he was just using it as a second time? What if why does it necessitate?
Which one is the Aramaic?
I don't know the word in Aramaic. I don't know Aramaic.
What necessitates the double entente?
That the word can mean either or, and Jesus' statement is, you cannot see the kingdom of God unless you are born anothen. So it's an adverb modifying born.
But what if Jesus, the way I would respond to that, it seems like Jesus is saying you must be born a second time. He said that in Aramaic. That's what John meant when he translated it. He's not meaning from above. Could that be
John means from above because the context warrants Jesus' discussion. Afterwards he says you must be born of water and the Spirit, connecting it to Ezekiel 36 of being cleansed, and that, again, the further discussion from John, or Jesus, depending on, you're right, who you think said John 3:16 and following, that God is the one who is the birther. God's the one who does it. So the from above means a heavenly birth, not just being birthed again. So the second time, the again language doesn't mean new birth. That's old birth done again. And so Nicodemus takes it as an again, i.e., how can I go back into my mother's womb a second time? And Jesus says, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying. I'm saying the other meaning of this word. And Bart Ehrman says, well, they didn't speak Greek, so this doesn't work in Aramaic. The double entente doesn't affect, because in the Greek text, it's the same word. That's his argument. So he knows Aramaic, I don't. But I love the fact that you responded to it. I can't. So you're smarter than I am, Joe. But would you think a little bit of Greek would help? Or maybe a little Aramaic?
I'm kind of confused still. Like, so are they saying that it was like translated wrong, or like what?
No,
like,
Bart Ehrman's accusation is this didn't happen.
Didn't occur. So he's saying
It didn't happen.
it's made as
It happened in some other
So
fashion,
this
and
isn't
John is putting words in Jesus' mouth and
Okay.
Nicodemus' mouth that did not occur.
Get it? Okay, yeah.
He says this didn't happen. This is actually one of the reasons Bart Ehrman
Didn't people speak
apostatized.
both of those languages back then?
So we'll get into that
Couldn't they
very
not?
briefly. This is introductory topic.
My brain hurts, and we're not even like 3 pages
What if they
in.
just came from their beginning Greek class and they were trying it out?
Yeah. Oh.
I don't know. That might be a little unlikely. So how has knowing Greek affected Dr. Ehrman's take on Nicodemus' conversation with Nicodemus?
Some questions.
Somewhat a rhetorical question.
Cynical
He
about
left the faith.
Oh, he did.
He's not a believer.
Because of
Oh,
that?
wow.
This is one of his big reasons. he grew up in a tradition that held to a very, very, very wooden view of inspiration. And his statement is, if God can't keep the text pure, then he can't keep anything pure. So therefore, he's not good. It's the King James only argument, but taken to its logical conclusion that clearly there's evidence that the word's not perfectly kept, i.e., we have the exact text perfect. There's mistakes. God used fallible people to preserve his word, so we have it today. That's it for another discussion in another class.
I mean, I don't know. I just don't see how he could be so definite that they translated it wrong or whatever.
You're with a lot of people.
I mean, because how do we know so much of the language back then so purely? Like, Greek was being spoken back then, so they could have. I mean, I speak Spanish all the time. I kind of speak Spanish all the time. Just, other people speak other languages sometimes. It could have been that. Or, I mean, I just don't understand how he could be like.
He hates God. No, I'm not going to put words in the man's mouth.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So there are a few different ways to respond. Joe gave one. Yours is absolute incredulity. I'll give just two. So I pulled this from an article defending that Dr. Ehrman is just flat out wrong. I don't know how right they are, but I found one. So there is a double entendre in Aramaic, and it is even necessary. And it is even necessary because Ehrman is being sloppy or deceptive. That's my summary of the article. But I don't know if they're right, so. I imagine Dr. Ehrman knows this stuff, so he's never, as far as I know, he's never responded to it, so they could be wrong. But someone responded, someone in a similar way Joe did. Another possibility, again, this is only a second, there are undoubtedly more, is that they were speaking Greek. Dr. Stanley Porter, Professor G. Scott Gleaves, and Hewson T. Ong have argued quite extensively that this is more than likely a reality. With all that said, I'll hold off on that. These are actually two of the volumes. This one is Did Jesus Speak Greek by G. Scott Gleaves, The Emerging Evidence of Greek Dominance in First Century Palestine. This is an amazing book. I read it before I learned Greek, and his argument is amazing. And this is, admittedly, more for the scholarly minded. This is the Journal of Greco-Roman Christianity and Judaism. I bought it last year as soon as I heard it was coming out, and I said I need to buy it. And I bought it, and it's awesome. So these are both really great volumes if you'd like to peruse them again, if you want to borrow them and try your knack at reading hard stuff. But the Scott Gleaves one actually is pretty good. You can borrow that for an extended period. I would highly suggest it. It's really good. So much so that I'm completely convinced that Jesus spoke Greek. And it was probably his primary language. But all things aside, how do you think knowing Greek will affect your own study of the Bible? Question to ponder. So, with that introduction off to the side, before we get into the lesson, any quick questions before we get moving? Any long questions? Save them for after class then. So, where am I at? Lesson 3. I've entitled it Walking Through Tide Pools. So, using this illustration of this pool that slowly gets deeper. As Karen, Ron, and I were talking on Sunday, we are never going to get above knee height in the water. So right now we are just splashing around in some tide pools. We're actually not getting above the ankles. And a lot of this is going to be a little bit of review from last week. It may seem at first that we're learning something new tonight, but I assure you we're actually going to be familiar territory. We're going to cover 3 things that are in English, and apart from recognizing them, they aren't much different at all in Koine as far as function goes. And they are adjectives, adverbs, and pronouns. A little adverb, anothen, that's an adverb. I didn't even mean to do that. That's just kind of how it happened. So, I want to start off with going over John 1 through 5 a little bit and just rehashing those first and second declension endings from last week. Does anyone remember them at all? I know some people said they were going to a little... Yeah, there we go. Do you remember what hey is?
Feminine.
Feminine? Feminine, what case is it?
I don't know.
Case is how it's functioning in a sentence. That would be nominative or the subject. And singular. So, but I have a little chart there. Again, the chart that we used again. So what I have written up here are... We'll go over it. Don't worry. Because this is necessary for this lesson. So what I have written up here are all of the nouns, apart from articles, in John 1 through 5. Does anyone know what this side of the board is? What case? Is this nominative, accusative, genitive, or dative? Take your time. Why is it not dative?
Isn't that the one that has
The little on it?
Yota.
Iota? The little iota subscript down below? Is that what you're talking about, Jody?
maybe?
The little thing,
Is
the little,
that right?
the
Then
little
yeah.
thing down below it?
Sure, if it's right, that's what I mean.
Are you talking about something like this? So let's say you do an alpha
Like that
and you have
one.
something down there.
Yeah, like that. Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah.
Oh, you got it.
That would be a dative.
Good job.
Perfect. So which one of these is a dative then?
Last.
The last one? It's a dative. That doesn't work. Dative. Yeah, that's my black one though. So which one's this one? Nominative? Awesome. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to do that one more time. People are reading my handwriting. Nominative. So which one's this one? Take your time. If you can't remember its name, you can just give me the first letter in its word.
G.
G? Yeah.
Genitive.
Yeah! Awesome. Sweet. Okay, there we go. Genitive. My computer yelled at me the entire time I kept writing that, saying I'm spelling it wrong. So which one's this one? This last one. We already did nominative, genitive, and dative. Accusative, that's right. Process of elimination. So, accusative.
Is it genitive? No N-A? Gen, G-E-N-I-T-I-V-E.
I have no idea right now.
Genitive.
Genative? Genative?
Genitive. G-E-N-I-T.
Gen.
G-E-N-I-T.
Let's try this one more time.
That's why your computer, trust the computer.
I know, man. I know. Gen.
T-I.
Genitive.
Two.
T-I.
Genitive. Oh,
You
stupid
got it.
computers. Ugh. Can't stand technology. Oh, look, I'm recording a video. Okay. So, does anyone remember what the nominative case, it is case, does in a sentence? Well, how is the nominative function in a sentence? Cameron? It functions as the subject. That's right. So the subject. As a general rule of thumb, the nominative is the subject. As a general rule of thumb, what's the accusative?
The object.
The object. The direct object would be a little more specific. And these we'll worry about for now, right now. What's a function? Does anyone remember the word? That special word that I wrote down that the genitive you should connect with the genitive.
Restrict.
Restrict. So the genitive restricts What does the genitive restrict?
The word preceding it, but would that be?
Gun control.
Is that the possessive word?
It would be possessive. It's not the most accurate definition. It's why we use the word restrict. If you were to use a sentence and say Ron's wife is Karen. Ron's is the possessive. Does Ron possess Karen? No, it's restricting Ron's wife to a specific individual. It's Ron's wife. It's not just anyone's wife. It's Ron's wife. The man's wife. Does the man own the wife? Question mark. So it's restricting the wife to a particular man. In this case, Ron.
Like specifies.
Yeah. It's not just a general. It's bringing it with a little more specificity. So it's restricting it in some way. In English, we have this same notion with the apostrophe S. We call it possessive, but it's not the best way to describe it. So it restricts. It's the word that precedes it. It's called a head word or the head noun. Head noun. What was the word for dative that I said I wanted you to remember? Relationship? Shows various relationships in the sentence, clause, or the phrase. The other way actually datives can work is datives can function as the indirect object, which would be a little bit more relationship. So Daniel drank the glass Daniel would be the nominative as the subject. Drank is the verb. The glass is the accusative direct object. Daniel drank the glass with his hand. So with his hand would be a dative. It's showing relationship. How did I drink the glass? I drank it with my hand. It's the utensil that I use. It's the means by which I used it. It's the indirect object. I'm drinking with my hand, but I'm not drinking my hand. I'm utilizing my hand. It's a tool. That would be something that shows relationship in the sentence. But it can also be a direct object on occasions instead of an indirect object. So this is why in John 1:1 through 5, you have tons of these nominative subjects. A whole bunch of them. I did not know there were that many until I started writing them all out and looking through it. It's a lot of them. Some of them are actually functioning adjectively, which is what we'll go through today. Some of them are functioning in a way to either modify the subject, or they're working as in a way to describe the subject. One of those ways. That's how adjectives work. They either modify it in that they are I have a note on that. Where is it? That they attribute a quality. So they're modifying it. They're giving the subject some kind of a quality to it. And the example in there would be, what did I write? I think I wrote, the cat is hairy on page 4. I have a hairy cat, and the cat is hairy. So this is one of the ways that adjectives work in English. Works the same way in Greek. It's describing the cat. We call that attributive. It's attributing a quality. Hairy. The cat's hairy. But a lot of these are also being used in another way. I don't have that up here right now. And that would be as a predicate. They're describing it. The cat is hairy. So now it's using this word hairy, not more along the lines of this in this fashion. It's not a direct object. It's describing, not a direct object. It's not a nominative, but it's describing it. But you'll find it in a nominative. But that aside. That's why you have a lot more of these in John 1:1 through 5. We do the same thing in English. We just don't have the same endings. It's not much different. There's just a different way we recognize it and find it. And so the reason that, and this is, I'll cover this a little bit when we end up getting to verbs. This is why the dative is actually used as a direct object a lot of the times. And it's used that way when you get to a particular form of a verb that's used. And in John 1:1-5, they're all over the place, this particular form of the verb. In fact, most of the verbs are that, which is why you have a pretty, if you were to count these out, that's 3, 6, 9, 11, 3, and 7. So 7 of, I believe, these two are being used as direct objects, or direct objects. Direct object, indirect object. I think that one's also an indirect object, and I think this one might be a direct object. I'm just looking at Ron's eyes. They're they're focusing.
We're trying to figure out the first two, they're identical.
They are.
Okay.
They're the exact same, but they're being used in a different way.
Good.
But I'm not going to get into that right now. Just there's a little bit extra there. Remember that our 6-week goal is to try and understand most of John 1:1-5. So I wanted to start off by really focusing on a little bit of it and trying to give you a little more. Right now, you should be able, with what we've learned so far, to identify in general what the subjects and the direct objects are. You can guess that these may be an indirect object or direct object. Which one? I'm not sure yet, but you'll know they're in that area. And these the same way. So you'll know, you should be able to look at it with what we've learned and the different vocabulary words that we've handed out to be able to look at it and go and say to yourself, I know that's an object. I know it could be an object. I know that's a subject, but I don't know how they're acting, what they're doing with each other, because I don't know verbs yet. But you can recognize them. And that's really, as far as we've gone with grammar, that's as far as I'd expect you to be, which is perfect, just fine. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go over adjectives, adverbs, and pronouns. You should be able to recognize an adjective and a pronoun because they utilize these same endings. Where's my pen? I'll leave that up there. They utilize the same endings of the first and they utilize the same endings of all the nouns. Of the first declension nouns, but they're not called that. We'll go there in a moment. First, I want to actually do one more, the substantive. So in English, we have a sentence there, still under adjectives, of both the good and the bad are here. Good and bad are both adjectives. They normally function to describe an object. They are attributing a quality, good, bad. The dog is good. The good dog. Same thing as up before. But in this case, they're taking the place of a noun. The noun would actually be dogs and cats. For you dog people, I actually gave dog the good word and cats the bad word. So both dogs and cats are here. Both the good and the bad are here. So a substantive is taking the place of a noun. It's substituting an adjective for a noun. So these are 3 ways that an adjective is used in English, and it works the same way in Greek. There's no difference in how they're being used. It's just recognizing them. And you recognize them the same way you'd recognize a noun. So this is 2 weeks of the same information, if you will, being blasted into you. So since Greek is an inflected language, adjectives follow a few guidelines. So a little bit different than English. Again, it's how we recognize them. They work the same way. They agree with the noun it modifies in gender, number, and case. Normally, adjectives will follow the noun they're modifying. They won't be before it. They'll be after it. But they can be also before it, but we'll get there. Adjectives have no gender of their own. It may be used to modify a noun of any gender. So we looked on your homework, 2 weeks ago we had the word logos, which means word. It's masculine. It's always masculine. But if you were to put an adjective in front or behind logos, whatever way it ends up being, it could be the good word. Good is a masculine word as well. If you were to use a word, I'm trying to think of an adjective that's feminine, and I can't think of one right now. I know I have some examples in here somewhere. There. Ponira. Ponira means evil, bad.
That one's
Yeah.
Man.
Evil, bad. But you would still adjust it because it's an adjective, and you'd make it poniros because it's modifying logos. So it can work in either way. The example here has it as a feminine.
So you change the ending to
You-
match the.
Because it's
What is-
modifying the word logos, which
and
is
logos
masculine.
masculine.
And I'm sorry, what are you doing when you're modifying logos? Like, what are you saying, like, in English when you're modifying logos with whatever the feminine thing was?
The word means evil or bad.
Like if you did an evil word, you would make it a masculine. You would change it to a masculine.
You'd just put the masculine ending on it because it's modifying the masculine word.
But if you looked it up in the dictionary, it would be a masculine.
It would be masculine. It would be masculine if you looked it up in a lexicon. I actually brought a lexicon. This is my other favorite thing that I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to save this for later. So I actually have 2 different lexicons here. Actually, no, I'll say that because I actually have a note for it. I have a note for that. We actually have a point in class for that specifically. So hold that question. Hold that happy thought, Peter, and we'll move on. That's okay. We all struggle.
So, okay.
It's just like you.
What's your question?
It's just like what you do in
No,
Spanish.
give me a minute.
With-
So when you said what was the first word that you said that meant like evil, bad?
Poniras.
And you were modifying it, you were using that word to modify logos?
Logos.
And what are you saying when you modify logos into whatever? Okay, what do you say when you're modifying logos?
Modifying, it's changing logos to just being this, I have to use the word, this word that means word. You're changing it from just being a word to what kind of a word. Modifying it means it's giving it some kind of a quality.
So, okay, so polygraphs or whatever it means.
Poniras. Poniras. Or
Means
poneras.
evil, bad, so then you're saying evil, bad, whatever logos is.
Evil, bad word.
Word. So evil, bad, word. So logos is word.
Mhm.
So you're saying now you're making logos evil, bad word.
Yeah, it means
Okay.
bad word,
Cool.
evil word.
Sweet.
Okay.
Wait,
That's what I was
now
trying to
I'm
understand.
confused.
All right, so one's good.
Which one did you
Next.
change? Which one did you change the ending to? Logos or
Poneros.
okay?
Poneros.
You changed
The
the
adjective,
adjective to match
Mhm.
the subject.
because adjectives don't have gender of their own. Their gender changes to whatever word they're modifying.
And I think of like in Spanish when you say los or el
Mhm.
to go,
Yeah.
match it to the subject.
In Spanish, the article will change depending on.
But this is you
what it
changing the adjectives.
Yeah. If that'll help,
That
that's not
helps
too
my
bad.
learning.
Good. Any other questions on adjectives and not having a gender of their own? Okay. So 3. Adjectives use the same endings as nouns. However, they don't tell us the declension of the noun. The declension is what tells us what gender the noun is. First declension is feminine. Second declension is masculine and neuter.
So we say that sentence again.
So, adjectives use the same endings as nouns, the same exact endings. So, if you look on page 3, you have this first and second declension case endings. So, those are our declension case endings. However, they don't tell us declension. Adjectives don't tell you what declension they are. Because for adjectives, it identifies gender, not declension. The declension will tell us how the noun, what gender a noun is, or how it's being used, all of those things. But for adjectives, it doesn't say how it's being used. It's telling us what word it's going to be modifying. It's gender. That's what an adjective's doing. It has to modify it. It has to match it in gender, number, and case to know what word is modifying. If they don't match, then it's just up in the air, question mark, what's it doing? I have no clue.
Like when you see that in the sentence, you look for the same ending of that subject or
Exactly,
and then those two are what they're describing.
Yeah.
That's describing.
So then I had written down there the masculine, feminine, and neuter endings for an adjective. And they're actually no different than the chart on page 3 because, again,
They match.
they use the same endings. So I have there some examples. This is right out of my textbook that I utilize. A masculine word. So those two words, agathos, agathi, and agathon, are the same word, but with different genders corresponding to them. And that means good. Side note, the name Agatha means good in Greek. Why is it Agatha? Because it's feminine. Agatha's a feminine name, so they gave it a feminine ending. Yeah. So, and then the middle one is ponera, and that's another adjective. And if you put it in masculine, it'd be poneros. If you put it in neuter, it'd be poneron. And its feminine endings are the alpha endings. If you remember from our last class, there's 3 different kinds of endings in the first declension. There's the eta endings that are all etas, just like the agatha there. Then there's alpha endings, which are all alphas, just like the ponera. And then there's that eta sandwich with alpha bread. That's for you, Cameron. So with what we've learned so far, we should be able to, with time, recognize an adjective. Just knowing it is an adjective. But now we have to recognize what kind of an adjective it is. So remember those adjectives that we have in English. We have attributive adjectives. We have predicate adjectives, and then substantive adjectives. We have the same things in Greek. So if you turn to page 5, there's a lot of words on that page. These are pulled straight out of the textbook because I didn't feel like condensing this information into a sentence is going to do it any justice. Because this is all recognition of how an adjective is working. Since we use English intuitively, we actually know these things, but we don't think about them. And so all it is trying to jog your memory about however long it was ago. Some of us, it's shorter than others, and some of us, we're very bad in English. Jogging our memories helps us. I was very bad. So the first one up at the top there is what's called the attributive adjective. So this is what it's attributing a quality to it. It's modifying it in some way. It's giving it a quality. And so if you were to see it in the text, the adjective would have an article, and the noun may or may not. But the adjective is going to have the article. So you have your example there, and there's 2 different positions it gives. Don't worry about that for now. So that word, hagios, means holy. Hagia Sophia, does anyone know that phrase? Hagia Sophia? Holy wisdom is what it means. It's a Roman Catholic prayer, or song. Don't worry about that. So in the first attributive position it has the article, an adjective, and a noun. So what that does is one of my little rip memory things is to recognize this. An attributive attributive adjective is going to have an article. And so in English, we translate it with the Holy God. So I'm almost cheating. If it has an article, what is an article? An article is the. So the Holy God. And that has the article. So I'm going to look at the adjective and say the adjective noun. Even in the bottom one, what we call the second attributive position, the noun has an article, but so does the adjective. So the adjective has an article. So the adjective noun. Because that's good English. You don't do the noun, the adjective. Does that make sense? Is that kind of assist? What does it make sense, Megan? Let's work it.
I don't get it. Like, so what's the point of having? So is one of them correct and one of them incorrect? Or
They're both correct.
okay.
So if you look at the top, the little definitions there. So attributive adjectives are typically a direct description of a noun.
Okay. Let me.
Yeah?
Yeah.
If your mom's going to help you, always accept it. Trust me.
But
Next. So then it gives you, ooh, man, you can barely read that. Gives you an example. Tone, proton, logon. So tone, proton means first. So tone, proton. The first word. Again, you have the article, adjective, noun. The first word. Tis, kenis, logis. The empty word. Noun, adjective, noun. Or article, adjective, noun. Or pistu logu, the faithful or dependable word. In this case, it's just article, adjective, noun. Predicate adjectives make a statement about the noun, and it goes on to give that one. An adjective that modifies an articular noun. Articular noun is a noun that contains the article, hence articular. The word's right inside it. It's one of those words that can be a little daunting. I was always someone who was really confused by big, smart words. Articular is one of those, to me, was a big smart word. It's not a big smart word. It means has the article. So, an adjective that modifies an articular noun, so the noun's going to have an article, will always have an article in front of the adjective. So, if a noun has an article, the adjective is going to have an article. This is called the attributive position. Again, this is the attributive article. This is giving it a quality. Two attributive patterns may occur. So this is directly with your question there, Megan. Two attributive patterns, the first and second, there's no difference in meaning. They don't mean anything different. They'll just come up in a different way. Usually the author's using it for some kind of an emphasis, maybe, maybe not. So every author has a little bit of their own flair, their own style.
Okay. But it means the same thing.
It means the same thing. Doesn't mean anything different. If you look at the English, wow, I did a really bad job cutting that. If you look at the English of it, it means the same thing. The Holy God and the Holy God, even though they look different. It's just how Greek functions with articles and these
Kind of
endings.
not that picky about the order. You just have to match it up by looking.
Yep. And for us English speakers and English readers, it just means we have to look at it a little bit more. So,
Probably just kind of look at the whole sentence instead of the order.
you do. A lot of times you read Greek in your head and it eventually, not eventually, but you read Greek in your head and you have to back up when you're translating it. Because you see a word, you have to pause and say, oh,
Oh, those two.
this has to get moved this way. So you keep reading and then you go backwards.
Yes,
Is it the same way if you like speak Greek, or is it like I'm sure?
It would. I mean, if you think about Spanish, a lot of times they'll put subjects, objects at beginnings of sentences, and you have to back translate in your head. And the more you're used to it, the more you don't have to think about it. It's utilization. So the more you read Greek, the more you study Greek, or any language, the less you have to really think about it. So the next one we're going to look at is the predicate adjective. So when no article precedes an adjective used with an articular noun. So the noun still has an article, but the adjective doesn't. The adjective is said to be in predicate position and is translated as a predicate adjective, supplying the verb is or are. So this is actually your first instance of actually learning a verb, and it's not even in the text. It's
like an
implied.
article, but it's okay.
Yeah. And so what this means is my own personal memory device is when there's no article for the adjective, when there's an article with the adjective, you say the article noun. So the God, the Holy God. If there's no article, then I don't want the. So instead of the, it's describing it. So God is holy instead of the God. the holy God, it's God is holy. Does that help anybody at all? This is my own method. By all means, figure your own out, unless mine works for
when it's
you.
in the middle that it does that. I don't know.
So, in Greek, but not in English, a noun and an adjective can thus form a complete sentence all by themselves. The words are true. Separate verb is not needed. So, it's two patterns again. There's no difference. So, if we look at the first one, it says it's the same phrase, the same words. So, hagios, ho, theos. So, God is the subject in this instance, and hagios is actually the direct object, even though it has that same ending. Because God is something. God is holy, but it's describing it. The one below it just flips the word order and actually follows our English. Ho theos hagios. The God is holy. Same thing. Any questions? A lot of silence, no questions. I'm going to take that as a move on. So when a noun or an adjective does not have an article, it's called an arthrus. It's a big word. You can ignore it if you'd like. All it means is no article. An arthrus, no article. And an arthrus adjective will have the predicate usage. So if the adjective has no article, it's going to be predicate. It's going to give the noun quality to it. When an adjective is used within an arthrus noun, so if they both don't have an article, if the noun doesn't have an article, only context is going to tell us how it's being used. In English, this happens all the time. Next week, I want to show you some really cool sentences in my Greek grammar that the author used that are fascinating. And if you didn't know English, you would look at it and say, I don't know what he's saying. They're going to be really cool, I promise. Cameron and I saw them. Or was it Kofi? It was all three of us, wasn't it? Yeah, and we just started chuckling because they were just mind-blowing. So, down below that, before we move on to my information for reference, there's two examples of adjectives in the predicate position, one in each of the two possible ones. So if you look at them, I want you to look at the English first. And if you want to follow along, I'll explain Matthew 13:16 in Greek. So in English it says, your eyes are blessed. So if you look to the left at the Greek, the first word in Greek is the pronoun your. The second word is the word for blessed. It's an adjective. The third word is the nominative plural article. The fourth word is the word for eyes, and it's all plural. There's no verbs there. Yet, in English, we say, your eyes are blessed. The reason why is because it is in the first predicate position. It's describing a quality to the noun, which is the subject. And the subject, because of its article and ending, we know that's the noun. That's nominative. And so it's doing something. It's being blessed because that's an adjective. A lot of times, and Cameron and I have done this numerous times in Greek class, you want to take your time and just over-explain things to the nines because it'll help you understand things even more when you're trying to work through these kinds of things. Hold open a sheet that has all these noun and endings to them, and that's how it'll go through. Oh, we got to fly through. We're way late. Okay. Too many questions. No, not too many questions at all. So information for reference. So this is back to your question there, Jody and Megan. So information for reference. When you find it, oh my gosh, when you find an adjective in a Greek dictionary, what we call a lexicon, this is the weapon. This is a registered weapon. This is BDAG. This is awesome. This is the Greek dictionary. This is the Greek dictionary of the New Testament and other early Christian literature. This is the big boy. This is the little boy. This one is just New Testament, and it's really small. This one is just death. So you can look at those if you'd like. but I just want to point that out. That information there is explaining to you how you'd find what an adjective is in the in one of those dictionaries, and they will always come in. They will always be listed with their masculine usage. They'll always say the masculine usage, and then it'll show you they'll show you how they're used feminine and then in the neuter. But they'll always be masculine because they have no gender of their own, so they just give you the list. So. Next, I want to talk about adverbs. Any questions about adjectives before we go on to adverbs? Okay. So adverbs, I hope we'll be able to fly through because the adverbs are very easily recognizable. Again, they function the same way in English. An adverb is a special word that modifies a verb. It's a general rule of thumb. But they can also modify other adverbs, adjectives, prepositions, and longer word units. In English as well as in Greek. Don't worry about those for now. Greek adverbs, just like their English counterparts, don't decline. So, you must be born again. Again doesn't decline. It's an adverb modifying born. It's adjusting born. How are you supposed to be born? You're supposed to be born again. It doesn't decline. It doesn't change. Greek adverbs don't decline either. They don't change their endings like adjectives. They actually have their own set of endings corresponding to their meaning, and most commonly, that is omega sigma. Just like in our English, our suffix ly means it's an adjective. Happily, he ran down the stairs. How did he run? He ran happily. Run is the verb. Happily is the adverb. It's modifying it. ly. You change happy, an adjective, and add ly. Happily. Wonderful. Greek adverbs use the same thing, but it's a different word, different letters. Omega, sigma. Nicely I have the examples there. Adverbs generally modify the word or phrase that follows them. They also have a different set of endings that express time, source, position, and frequency. So if you look at them there, ote, omicron, tau, epsilon, if that's appended to an adjective, it's telling you a time reference. So, yeah, and there's a few different, and then source, position, and frequency. And there's some Greek examples of adjectives turned into adverbs there, that little chart there. So you have a whole bunch of different words. Let's use one that's pretty. So dikaios. Dikaios means just or righteous. It's an adjective. And if you were to change the omicron sigma to omega sigma, it would mean justly or righteously. And if you added another one of those other endings, so then is an ending of an adverb. So ano means above or up. And so if you put the then at the end of ano, it's telling you up is the source, or again, source, it's coming from above, again. That's why it means born again or from above, is because of the adverbial ending and the meaning of the word itself. So, and some adverbs actually don't have any suffix, and they always stay the same, like the word for now, noon, with a Rasmussen pronunciation. If you ever see that word, ni, upsilon ni, it means now. Mental note, noon, because everyone knows noon's the greatest time of day. I prefer midnight. So,
Hey,
any questions of adverbs?
I know I'm just like a total baby at this.
No,
But,
not at all.
No,
Like
trust me,
with
you're
the
not.
pure and the purely,
Uh-huh.
it's I don't know my letters, but like the purely is omicron sigma, and what's the O with that accent on it?
That's omicron sigma would be pure, omega sigma purely.
How would you pronounce that differently? Omicron and omega.
You would not.
Well, that's dumb.
Is that one a short O and the other one's a long O?
So just
Well, this is the harassment. So the harassment, you say ognos for the omicron. So pure would be ognos, and purely would be ognos.
Oh, okay.
With the Erasmian,
Os and O's.
with the Erasmian pronunciation, it would be different.
Oh,
With the
That's
pronunciation
like-
system I teach in my Greek classes, no, it'd be the
So
same.
this is
your
like
Greek is older. I missed.
No, it's they try the Greek that we learn is a little closer to modern Greek.
Oh, and they just.
So in modern Greek, it sounds the same.
Oh.
But the Greek we
okay.
use is an attempt at being a little closer to the original.
Okay. But if I wanted to differentiate in my brain, I would
That-
say
If you
Os
use
for pure and
if you use the
Os
first
for
week's
purely.
pronunciation chart that you got, and if you don't have it, I can email anyone every week's stuff. I have them
It's
saved.
just not
on my
sticking,
technology.
So, but
Yeah. So if
But
you wanted
that,
them, I could
that
send them
would
to you.
help me to do that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But just use those pronunciations. It helps. The Erasmian pronounces every letter, and every letter that is different, they will pronounce them differently. So omicron. What is the short and the long, Tracy? What does a short O sound?
Ah.
Ah. What's a long O sound?
O.
There we go. I've never been good at that.
So short and long. For,
So,
for those
Omicron, small O. I should know this.
anymore.
Small O, omicron. Big O, omega. Omicron, omega. So, any more questions about adverbs before we get on to the nitty gritty that is pronouns? You scared me a little bit there, Ron. I thought you were raising your hand.
Yes,
Okay.
I scared myself. I didn't know what I was gonna ask.
So again, this week is really a lot of review, and I'm just trying to grill it into you that all of this stuff works the same in English. It's just recognizing it, and that's something that takes a little bit of effort, i.e., time, because it's new. Anytime we learn something new, we have to work at it. Not all of us are savants, like some people, and it takes some effort. So pronoun in English is a word that substitutes for a noun. Again, same thing in Greek. A pronoun substitutes for a noun. Often they're used to rather than constantly repeat a noun, refer back to the noun. The word that is used to define the thing the pronoun refers back to is the antecedent. I think it was either Karen or Jody earlier mentioned this exact thing about the pronoun. So look at the fire truck. It is red. It is a pronoun referring back to fire truck. Make sense? Yeah. See, we all passed English in high school and grade school. So pronouns, much like nouns, use person, case, and gender. They also utilize similar endings to the ones we learned last week, along with adjectives. Is that not convenient for all of us? So wonderful. So right there is the first and second person pronouns in your chart. You'll notice, by way of example, the nominative singular, so the subject singular, of the first and second person are a little different than what you may have expected if you remember your declensions and the case endings. So ego, how many people have heard a sermon that says that's where the preacher has said, ego, I, me? Oh, I know all of you heard because Dale's mentioned this numerous times. Ego is the pronoun for I. And me,
Oh, like ego.
there you go. Lego my ego. That's how I always remember it too. So me is a verb that means I am. And so ego me means I am. Oddly enough, you don't need the ego. But ego, not ego, but ego, means I. Su means you. Oddly enough, it's the same in Spanish.
That's a possessive in Spanish.
I know, but it still means you. Sort of.
Your.
So,
His or her.
I cheated in Spanish. So that chart right there is your first and second person pronouns. And if you look at them and hold a first and second declension chart next to each other, you'll notice the different similarities between the genitive, the dative. You'll notice the similarities between the genitive plural and the dative plural, and you will see some similarities in the accusative. The nominative plural doesn't look the same. But you want to, if you go over the chart, that's what you want to pay attention to, are the similarities. Another one to recognize is a first person plural has the eta beginning to it and the breathing mark, and the second person plural has the upsilon and a breathing mark. One of the deaths about the Cameron Kofi's in my Greek class is that they are pronounced the same. But in this one, they're not. So the plural first person is hemis, hemon, hemin, hemas. Second person is humis, humon, humin, humas. Sounds pretty nice, if you ask me. I didn't learn that pronunciation system. So any questions about first and second person pronouns? They're utilized the same way English is. It's just recognizing them. That's the only difference. So any questions about those? Does everybody know what a pronoun is? In Greek, it's the same. Okay, so. Yeah, the little bit different one now. So this one I actually gave as a vocabulary word last week. I think so, yeah. Last week I gave this as a vocabulary word. The third person pronoun. Autos. It's actually right here. It's right here and right here. The third person pronoun is autos, auti, aute, and auto. So masculine, feminine, neuter. Notice that there is gender in third person pronouns unlike the first person pronoun. Wow, that's the wrong one, isn't it? This is the wrong one. Nope. I don't know where it went. Where my piece of paper go? There it is. So if you look at the first and second person pronouns, there's no gender in them. They're generic. But on page 8 with your third person pronouns, there's actually gender. If you were to put the third person pronoun in English, the masculine forms usually would be some form of he, his, or him. The feminine is she or her, and the neuter is it or its. The plural is they, their, and them, regardless of gender. Any questions about the third person pronoun? Okay. So notice the endings. The endings are the same as any adjective you'd use, or Gesundheit. Any adjectives or the noun endings, except the feminine uses that only etas, if you would notice those. So, and a good rule of thumb for trying to recognize these and adding in that whole concept of your articles is the endings for all but the nominative singular, plural, and singulars. They're the same exact endings that your articles are. So if you have a little bit of extra time, go up in your article, grab the article sheet, and just look at them side by side, and they
it's
just
the same thing you do with your noun, but you do it with your
they just follow it right along. So these are some of the easiest ones to recognize, and if I do hope somebody has recognized that this word, which is the third person pronoun, which can mean he, him, his, her, hers, and it and its, is where we get our word for auto, automobile, automatic, self, mobile, self-moving, third person. You know, it's very bad to talk about yourself in the third person. Daniel's very upset right now. So, the third person pronoun occurs more than 5,200 times in the New Testament. So you're going to see it very frequently if you open up your Greek Bible. The pronoun autos agrees with its antecedent in gender and number. The case is determined by the pronoun's function in the clause. So whether it's nominative, Genitive, dative, or accusative. You should not think of autos as meaning he, even when it occurs in masculine gender, though it often be represented that way. Rather, it's a word that refers to its antecedent, the person or thing to which I have just referred. One of your first concerns is to determine whom, to whom, or what a particular pronoun refers. Only then do you know the meaning of the pronoun and what the appropriate English equivalent might be. So, the similar way to say mankind, although today it's a little different. No one normally says womankind. That's actually an incorrect word. You say mankind. And even amongst the SJWs, social justice warriors, they will still refer to a group of women as, hey, guys. I thought guys was masculine. No, it's because it depends. You can look at a group of women and say, hey, guys. You don't look at a group of guys and say, hey, gals, though. That's completely off limits, except for a certain group of people. So, sorry. It's going on YouTube. The pronoun, so there's a small tip off to the side I want you guys to notice. No, it's going to stay. The pronoun autos always has a smooth breathing mark. So the pronoun autos has a smooth breathing mark. It's important to remember because you will later meet a similar, well, we're not going to meet one later, but there's another word that is distinguished only by the breathing mark. So it actually has a rough breathing mark, and it's not a pronoun, but it's spelt autos. It is another pronoun, sort of. It's a relative pronoun, if I remember correctly. It means this one or that one. But that's that on that note. So any more questions about pronouns before we finish this off? Any questions about pronouns? Remember, they function the same way English ones do. It's just recognizing if it is a pronoun or not. And in the text that our goal to know moderately well, there are 3 pronouns specifically in it. This is also a pronoun, but don't worry about it. This one means this one, and it's used in the masculine way. It's masculine, not masculine way. It's masculine, but it means hey, this one, but it also means he. Again, not too worried about it. Pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs function the same way in English. Is what I want you to take away from this. It's not something you need to be daunted by knowing how they're used. It's just recognizing them and recognizing what case they're in. That's the only difference between Greek and English pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs. It's just the same thing with the nouns. You just have to know the word, which if you can look it up online or borrow a dictionary from somebody who has one. Or you can ask them to buy you one. A cheap one. That big one is not cheap. So, any questions regarding what we did today, what we've learned today and covered, or covered and hopefully learned? So, as normally I do give a little bit of homework if you so choose. It's optional. And this week's homework is about the same as last week's. Except instead of writing out the article, I want you to write out the first and second declensions, which is not too much different than the article. And memorize them best you can. And I gave you a big chart there to draw from. Yeah, I made that one real big. Real big. Next time I'll make it bold, too. I don't know if I can do that. And then I gave you 5 more vocabulary words. They're on the last page, which doesn't have a page number because my editor didn't do it. So we have the word for breath or spirit, the word for brother, brothers, the word for heavens or sky, the word for earth, ground, and the word for universe and world.
Want to say them?
Yeah, sure. You don't have to say pneuma. You don't have to pronounce all those first 2 letters.
Yeah.
It's a little hard, but you can just say pneuma. Pneumatics comes from the word for, spirit. So pneuma, or pneumatos for the genitive, and to, it's a neuter word. Adelphos, adelphos. Adelphu, or ho, is its article. It's a masculine word, but it doesn't just mean brothers. It can mean sisters. Yeah. Uranos, uranos, uranu, that is another masculine word. Uranus, uranos means heavens or sky. There we go. And then,
She has a friend named Moran.
Except I pronounce it wrong. It's probably more pronounced like that. He kept telling me you're saying my name wrong. I'm like, I'm trying my best. Anyway.
oh. And then we have gay, gace, and this is a feminine word, earth. Then we have cosmos, cosmu, this is a masculine word. Cosmos. So, all right. So any questions before I end my little recording for my own purposes? Awesome. You're wonderful. I love your Tiger's hat, Joe. That's an awesome D. Okay.